So our task here really, as we've been emphasizing, is to separate fact from fiction, science from myth. And there are a lot of myths out there. If you go into a bookstore these days, you will see numerous books that claim to have the answer to all of life's nutritional and health problems. Oh, you can eat away your disease. There are prescriptions based on food for virtually any kind of ailment. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of such books. Let me just give you an example. Fit for Life is one that I like to pick on because, in fact, it's sort of easy pickings. This book has been around for actually a couple of decades. It goes on and off bestseller lists. It was written by Harvey and Marilyn Diamond, who really had no scientific background whatsoever, but they kind of found a niche for themselves and started to give all kinds of nutritional advice. But just to sort of give you a glimpse into the non-science of this book, here's a little passage. Within atoms and molecules reside the vital elements we know as enzymes. Enzymes are not things or substances, they are the life principles in the atoms and molecules of every living cell. Well, I first saw this little passage when a student brought it to me. It was handwritten on a card many years ago, and she wanted to know my opinion on it. I had not heard of the book at that time, and I read this little passage, and I thought that it must be some sort of joke, that someone had sat down and said to themselves, let me see now, what is the greatest amount of scientific nonsense that can be squeezed into the fewest words? Because here we have a candidate for that. In fact, enzymes are things, they are substances. They are protein molecules, they are composed of amino acids. They're tangible. You can put them in a bottle, you can have them on your shelf. They are biological catalysts. The body makes all of the enzymes that we need. We do not have to rely on any enzyme from an outside source. But the Diamonds apparently seem to think that enzymes are something akin to the human soul, which we may or may not have. They probably think I don't because of my criticism of their writings. No, they're very tangible things. The idea that by cooking or preserving food you're destroying its enzymes is a scientifically bankrupt idea. They also go on to say that the greatest threat to our food is processing. Day science entered the food industry was a sad day, they say. Well, of course, there are problems with processed foods, and we should be eating a lot of whole grain foods, a lot of unprocessed fruits and vegetables, that's true. But processed foods are not toxic. We have survived eating processed foods, so they kind of go overboard here. And any suggestion that the day science entered the food business was a sad day is just plain silly. We now are able to preserve our food for a longer time. We can add appropriate nutrients that have been removed by processing. Our food today is much cleaner than it used to be. That's not to say there are not problems, and of course we will refer to all kinds of problems in our food supply, but it is unreasonable to say that the modern food industry has introduced a sad day. The Diamonds point a finger at sliced white bread as an example of a devilish food. And I am certainly not going to defend sliced white bread. Of course we should be eating whole grain bread that has a lot of fiber in it. That's much healthier for us. But sliced white bread is not toxic. It's not going to kill us. But that's the impression that you would get if you read their epic. There are chemicals that are added to sliced white bread. That's true. And the ones that they take issue with are the preservatives. Yes, we do add preservatives. Why? Because if you don't, then within a couple of days, that's what the bread looks like, moldy. And market studies have shown that people do not buy this kind of bread. And indeed they should not, because molds produce a variety of very toxic compounds, all natural, of course. So we combat this problem by using a preservative. The preservative in this case is calcium propionate, which is of course featured on the label because all additives have to be put on the label. Well, preservatives are not put in there for any recklessness. It's not a question of some manufacturer deciding, gee, how can I wreak havoc with the health of the public by putting in some dangerous chemical into the food. The reason that preservatives are put in there is to prevent the growth of molds and fungi, which are potentially toxic. Any additive that is put into a food has to jump through all kinds of regulatory hoops and hurdles. It's not a question of a producer saying, gee, you know, I think calcium propionate would be a good preservative. Let's dump some into our flour. That's not how it works. Health authorities, FDA in the US, Health Canada here, have to be satisfied that the substance that is being added has a good risk to benefit profile. In the case of calcium propionate, that was not very difficult to demonstrate because propionates are extensively found in the human body. They are a metabolic byproduct of eating fat. In fact, propionates even show up in our underarm secretions, in our sweat. We excrete preservatives, believe it or not. Which brings up a very interesting notion. If you've ever been to France, you know that they have delicious baguettes. But you have to eat that baguette within about 17 seconds of buying it because they don't use any preservatives. So it will go hard and pretty soon moldy. But you know what, the way that the Frenchman traditionally carries his baguette home? Under the arm, of course. Well, natural preservation, secreting a lot of propionates. Well, talking about the French, we must allude to the French paradox. The French paradox asks the question, how is it that 50 million Frenchmen in France who smoke a lot, who eat fatty foods, don't have as many heart attacks as we have here in North America? In fact, if you look at this statistically, the coronary artery disease rate in North America is 4 times greater than that in France. Well, that's pretty interesting because you hop over the pond and take a look at what the French are doing. They're eating all of those fatty croissants. They're finishing their meals with cheese laden with saturated fat. And of course, they are not averse to foie gras, which is goose liver, stuffed geese. Certainly not a very attractive thing to think about, but it does taste good. So they're eating all these things, and yet they have fewer heart attacks than we have in North America. How do we explain this? Well, the French also watch more Jerry Lewis movies per capita than any other nation in the world. Indeed, there's a very strong correlation between fewer heart attacks in France and Jerry Lewis movies being watched. Can we therefore conclude that watching Jerry Lewis prevents heart attacks? No. Why? Because it's an association. An association never proves cause and effect. There's an association between wearing skirts and breast cancer. It does not prove that skirts cause breast cancer, obviously. So, back to our French paradox. They eat all those fatty things, they smoke, and they have fewer heart attacks. Why? Well, the suggestion, of course, is that the red wine that they're drinking is responsible for this protection. And the French wine industry, of course, heavily promotes that. But offhand, this doesn't make any more sense than the Jerry Lewis heart disease connection. It's an association. It is true that the French drink about 30 times as much red wine as we do here in North America. They have less heart disease. It doesn't mean the wine causes it. So before we start giving alcoholic beverages to our kids, we want to make sure that this is more than an association, that it is cause and effect. And cause and effect is what we traditionally look for in science when we want to have some nutritional impact or some impact with drugs. It doesn't mean that the red wine is not linked to the heart disease. It just means it's an issue that has to be investigated. And it has been. It has been looked into. Why? Because there's a theoretical possibility that it can have an effect. Red wine does contain a compound called resveratrol. This is one of those antioxidants. And studies have shown that resveratrol can have an effect on reducing the risk of heart disease. So there may be something to the red wine story. But here too, we have to be very careful that we don't just cherry pick data and that we look at the whole picture. Because the red wine, of course, also contains alcohol. And we know that alcohol is a carcinogen. A carcinogen is a substance that has been shown in some species, in animal or in human, to be capable of causing cancer. And with alcohol, there is not much doubt. We have had numerous studies showing that intake of alcohol can lead to cancers of the mouth, cancer of the throat, and in the case of women, to breast cancer. So one has to balance the cancer-causing ability of alcohol with the potential protective effect of the resveratrol. And the truth is that it isn't clear. No one at this time is suggesting that people who don't drink red wine take up drinking the red wine. At this point, I think all that we are comfortable with saying is that if you do drink a glass of red wine a day, there's probably no reason to give it up. But once again, you can cherry pick the data and talk only about the resveratrol, and some people do. You can go and buy resveratrol supplements, and they will refer to the red wine phenomenon and tell you that this is an effective way to protect yourself against heart disease, not referring to the notion that the animal studies have shown that it takes about the equivalent of 100 bottles of red wine a day to have that protective effect, and that the amount that you have in these pills is essentially insignificant. Furthermore, resveratrol is a very, very difficult substance to keep stable, and it very quickly decomposes, so it's unlikely that these kind of supplements will have any great benefit. But as you can see, it is possible to selectively refer to the scientific literature and to make it seem as if resveratrol is a dietary miracle.